Welcome back, everyone, to the Wisdom of the Philosopher series. Today, we're opening up what I think is one of the greatest practical guides to human flourishing ever written.
That would be The Letters from a Stoic by Lucius Annaeus Seneca the Younger.
Right. And these letters were mostly written to his friend Lucilius.
And they aren't just, dry philosophical exercises. They're deeply personal, almost like intimate conversations. These are essays from the last and incredibly productive years of a man who had truly seen it all.
Our mission today is, well, explicitly practical. We want to pull out the essential, the actionable wisdom from Seneca's letters.
A kind of shortcut, maybe.
Exactly. A shortcut to understanding how you can navigate life's complexities without just being completely overwhelmed. We're really trying to chart a course toward gaining some lasting clarity for ourselves.
And I think that clarity is only really possible when we understand the tension in Seneca's own life. I mean, here's a leading statesman, a very wealthy man in Rome, and the tutor to the emperor.
And not just any emperor, the Emperor Nero.
The tyrannical Emperor Nero, yes. And Seneca was later forced by Nero to commit suicide in AD 65.
He lived right at the nexus of power and principle. And the sources, they really highlight that. He was often criticized because his, quote, excessive wealth ill-assorted with the noble Stoic principles he professed.
That paradox is key.
It is. The philosopher in the emperor's court, that's what makes his advice so valuable. He wasn't writing from some isolated tower.
Not at all. He was writing from the very center of human corruption and political danger. He had firsthand knowledge of that friction between the ideal virtue and the brutal reality of daily life. His philosophy was forged in that fire.
So if this discussion helps you find some of that clarity in your own life, we do invite you to like and subscribe to the channel, and please share your thoughts in the comments.
We'd love to hear them.
Okay, so let's jump in with the foundational idea for Seneca. What is philosophy actually for?
For him, it's nothing less than medicine for the soul. He saw it as a mistress whose entire purpose was intensely practical.
And that purpose was?
To, in his words, cure souls. To bring peace and order to the feverish minds of men pursuing the wrong aims in life.
That sounds incredibly urgent. It makes philosophy sound like a matter of life and death, or at least spiritual health.
Exactly. He was very didactic about this. He demanded that a philosopher's words must speak to our condition.
If they don't,
then they're just wasted air. If the words don't result in some tangible improvement in your life, if they don't calm your fears or adjust your aims, then they're worthless.
And you can really feel his frustration with what we might call academic time wasting. He denounced other philosophers, even some of his fellow Stoics.
Oh, absolutely. He hated it when they got lost in verbal puzzles or logical hair-splitting.
What's that famous example he uses?
It's from his letter XC8. He mocks the question of whether a mouse, which is a syllable, can nibble cheese. He just dismisses these things as childish fatuities.
Right. They might win you an argument, but they do nothing to help you live a better life.
They do nothing to alleviate suffering or lead you toward virtue.
It's fascinating to think about the modern version of that, the endless social media debates that just drain your energy but don't move you 1 inch closer to real happiness.
For Seneca, the true goal was always singular, happiness. And that's achieved through virtus, which isn't just virtue, but more like excellence, arete.
And that focus on the practical also shaped his views on the so-called liberal studies, things like grammar, music, geometry.
Yes. In letter LXX8, he didn't say they were bad, not at all, but he argued they were just an apprenticeship, not our real work.
So they teach you skills.
But they don't teach you humanity. They don't teach you virtue or mercy or self-control. He asks, what good is a geometrician who can measure your estates if you don't first know how much a man needs in order to have enough?
The knowledge is all external, but it leaves you internally barren.
Precisely. So the critique isn't anti-learning, it's pro-purpose. If what you're learning doesn't help solve that core human problem of inner dissatisfaction, then it's just a diversion.
Which means, at the end of the day, the only study that is truly liberal, or liberating, is the pursuit of wisdom itself.
Because that is the only thing that makes a person genuinely free.
And that's the perfect transition. Freedom. If wisdom is the path to freedom, the Stoics tell us the journey starts with one core idea, living in accordance with nature.
Right.
But what does that actually mean in practice? It's a phrase we hear a lot, but it can sound, a bit vague.
For Seneca, living in accordance with nature means developing the rational part of your being. He called it the divine spark within us.
So our nature as humans is to be rational.
It's to use reason to conquer all the destructive forces. pain, grief, superstition, and especially the fear of death. It's about aligning your personal will with the universal order of things.
That requires some deep self-control. And this, of course, brings up the common criticism of Stoicism that the ideal wise man, the sapiens, seems completely unattainable.
Too perfect for any real flawed human being. And Seneca tackles this head-on in Letter 9. He makes a really crucial distinction. The wise man, he says, is content with himself so far as happiness is concerned.
So his joy is internal. It's self-sourced and complete.
Yes, but, and this is the key part, for the actual business of living, he still needs a great number of things. He still gets hungry. He still needs shelter. He's not immune to the world.
So internal self-sufficiency doesn't mean external isolation or invulnerability. It's about decoupling your core happiness from what happens to you.
And the Stilbo anecdote illustrates this perfectly.
Let's hear it.
So Stilbo's hometown was captured. He lost his wife, his children, his home. And Demetrius, the conqueror they called the city sacker, asks him if he's lost anything.
And what does he say?
Stilbo famously replies, "I have all my valuables with me."
Wow, that is just an astonishing statement of inner security.
Because his true possessions were untouchable. They were the qualities of a good, and an enlightened character. The physical world could be on fire, but his interior self was intact.
And this really becomes the Stoic test of wealth, doesn't it? Seneca himself was a rich man. He wasn't against having money.
No, but he required that you possess it without tremors. Riches should serve you. You should never serve them.
Which means the way to deal with the anxiety of having things is to constantly convince yourself you could be happy without them. To always see your wealth as being on the point of vanishing.
It's a kind of perpetual psychological preparation. And it's the total opposite of the Roman luxury he saw all around him, which he called the pursuit of unnatural living.
In letter CXC2, he talks about this, right? The goal of luxury being delight in irregular ways.
Wanting roses in winter or drinking without eating, luxury's whole goal is to break off relations with nature altogether.
That observation just resonates so deeply today. Our modern obsession with instant gratification, with getting anything we want at any time, it's all a form of seeking roses in winter.
It is. It's an attempt to artificially bend nature's cycles to our will through unsustainable consumption. And Seneca's solution is so simple. Poverty brought into accord with the law of nature is wealth.
The disciplined mind finds abundance in what's necessary, while the mind lost to luxury is always chasing the next extreme.
And that only leads to more dissatisfaction.
So if that internal discipline is the foundation, let's look at how Seneca advises us on our external lives, specifically the people and places we choose. He's brutally honest in letter 7 about the corrupting influence of the crowd.
He is. He says to Lucilius, "I never come back home with quite the same moral character I went out with."
That's a feeling I think we can all relate to.
He saw being in large, anonymous crowds as inherently harmful because vices just creep in and they leave their mark on you without you even noticing.
He was particularly disturbed by the public entertainment, wasn't he? The lunch hour arena shows.
Yes. He saw how what started as lighthearted contests had become, in his words, murder, pure and simple. The crowd screamed for blood, demanding fighters kill each other until there was no one left standing.
And his crucial insight was that being exposed to that violence all the time made the spectators themselves crueler and less humane.
So his command is crystal clear. You have to actively retire into yourself as much as you can.
But he's not advocating for being a total hermit, is he? We are social creatures.
No, but the community has to be curated. He says, associate with people who are likely to improve you. And, just as important, welcome those you can improve.
It's a mutual process, then.
It's a mutual process of moral refinement. As he reminds Lucilius, men learn as they teach.
This need for inward focus connects directly to the problem of restlessness, which he tackles in letter Texi 8. We see it all the time today. People moving cities, changing jobs, thinking a new place will fix their problems.
And Seneca just cuts right through that with the brutal truth. A change of character, not a change of air, is what you need.
You're just running away in your own company.
You're still carrying the same load on your spirit. The environment is irrelevant if your internal landscape is a mess.
Which makes the famous noise test from letter Philosophers so powerful. He describes his apartment, right? It's located directly above a public bathhouse.
Imagine the chaos. Grunting athletes, the slap of the masseur's hand, vendors shouting, horns tuning up, just absolute bedlam.
And he uses that external chaos as a test for his internal resolve. He realized the solution isn't to find external silence. That's often impossible.
The solution is to cultivate internal calm, to force his mind to become self-absorbed.
The lesson being, there can be absolute bedlam without, so long as there is no commotion within.
If you've conquered your internal noise, the outside world is just background static. And this commitment extends to our deepest relationships. Seneca stresses that true friendship must be cultivated for its own sake.
Not as a business deal.
Never as a business deal, not for advantage or gain. It demands absolute trust. He tells Lucilius to discuss everything with a friend, but first you have to discuss in your mind the man himself. Make sure he's worthy of that trust.
And once that trust is there, friendship becomes this profound commitment.
It's having someone to be able to die for, someone I may follow into exile. It goes beyond utility. It becomes a moral necessity.
So if that deep internal peace is the goal, Seneca argues that the ultimate practice, the final expression of freedom, has to be preparing for death itself.
This is maybe his most powerful lesson. From Letter 26, we must rehearse death.
And for a Stoic, rehearsing death, that's the same thing as rehearsing freedom.
They are entirely synonymous. A person who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave.
That's an incredible line.
Think about it. If you're living under a tyrant like Seneca was with Nero, the moment you let go of the fear of your own end, you place yourself beyond that tyrant's ultimate power.
It's the ultimate defense against any fear of loss, really. He reminds us that the fear is the worst part of it. He says, you're not going to die because you're sick.
You're going to die because you are alive. It's not some horrible exception to the rule of nature. It is the rule of nature.
The sources tell the story of Tullius Marcellinus, a friend of his, who was suffering from a long, terrible illness and chose suicide.
Yes, and the advice his Stoic friend gave him was so firm but also encouraging. He said, there's nothing so very great about living all your slaves and all the animals do it.
But to die well.
To die in a manner which is honorable, enlightened, and courageous, that is the great thing. It's about choosing your exit with reason and dignity instead of just clinging to suffering out of fear.
And this leads to what might be the ultimate Stoic idea about freedom.
The wise man escapes necessity because he wills what necessity is going to force on him.
Can you break that down?
By aligning his rational will with what is inevitable, with fate, he transforms what other people see as a crushing blow into a voluntary choice. He retains his inner freedom, his sovereignty, right to the very end.
And that seems to bring us to the close of our discussion on Seneca's letters. The core message, I think, it just resonates so clearly, even now. Wisdom isn't some abstract concept.
No, it's an active full-time mistress. It demands your total attention on the practical work of curing the soul.
By focusing relentlessly on what you can actually control, your reason, your character, your acceptance of nature, you achieve a kind of inward freedom.
A freedom that no external fortune, not wealth, not noise, and not even the finality of death can ever take away from you.
And this pursuit of virtue, it often helps to have a guide, a moral compass. Seneca, writing to Lucilius, actually quotes his philosophical rival, Epicurus.
Which is fascinating in itself.
It is, and he says we need to set our affections on some good man and keep him constantly before our eyes so that we may live as if he were watching us.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to reflect on. Who is the good man or good woman you are choosing to keep constantly before your eyes? It could be someone from history or someone in your life now.
And how does that chosen presence influence your daily decisions and your own ongoing pursuit of excellence?
A powerful question to carry with you.
It is. Thank you for joining us for this edition of the Wisdom of the Philosopher series.
We hope this discussion has offered some valuable perspective for your own journey.
Please do remember to like and subscribe to the channel, click that notification bell for more content like this, and share your own reflections on Seneca's timeless advice in the comment section below.
We look forward to reading them.
Until next time, keep seeking wisdom.